Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins. Of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins have about 6 or 7 goaltenders at this point. You know, all of them, I wouldn't say around similar levels. Obviously, you have Tristan Jarry, who is undoubtedly the starter. Then you have tier 2, which is Casey DeSmith, Alex Nedeljkovic, maybe Magnus Hellberg included in that tier. And then you have tier 3 with your Garrett Sparks, with your youngsters in Joel Blomqvist, in Taylor Gauthier. I'm missing one. They signed somebody else, I'm pretty sure, but somebody else is down in the minors. But really, the backup goaltender position is going to come down, at this point, it seems, to Casey DeSmith and newcomer Alex Nedeljkovic. This is, DeSmith, a lot of people want to see him gone. I don't think that's breaking news. I think you're included in that horror. You would have liked to see a new backup goaltender in town over Casey DeSmith, because he's been the Penguins' primary backup goaltender for the past 4 seasons. Mm-hmm. He's played 120 games, has a .911 save percentage, not bad, and 12.6 goals saved above expected. I don't think that's the issue with Casey DeSmith. The issue is not how he performs when he's in the role of backup. The issue is, if something is to happen to the starting goaltender, which it has for the past 2 seasons, is Casey DeSmith able to step up and be that number one guy? And the answer has been no, right? He looked good 2 seasons ago in the last couple of games when Tristan Jarry broke his foot, and then he got injured in the playoffs, in the first game of the playoffs, and we all saw how that ended up going. And then last year, Tristan Jarry goes down, Casey DeSmith has a little bit more time to be a starter, and eventually you just notice that he can't deal with the actual workload of being a starting goaltender in the National Hockey League. Enter Alex Nedeljkovic. Struggled over the past 2 seasons with Detroit. The Pens are hoping for a return to form from his Calder rookie season and signing him to a 1-year contract. Who would you give the advantage to entering camp between DeSmith and Nedeljkovic?
I think Nedeljkovic, because there's a lot riding on this damn Carlson deal. It's going to keep getting in the way of everything, because the Penguins cannot continue their offseason, or they cannot continue their roster construction without that deal either made or officially done with. Mm-hmm. Because maybe Casey DeSmith is involved in this deal. Because when it comes to this, now we have a defensive logjam. Now we have a goaltending logjam, because, like you mentioned, there's Jarry, DeSmith, Nedeljkovic, Magnus Hellberg, Garrett Sparks is down there, albeit on an AHL contract, but he's down there. And then 2 guys that are vying for NHL roles one day. That's 5 goalies that all have, I forget what it is. It's a number of NHL experienced goalies plus 2 more that might have that pedigree. That's a bit much. Now, I get that the Penguins might run a 3 goalie system too, which I would assume involve DeSmith and Nedeljkovic. Well, now you have a great logjam in the AHL. Have fun with that one. Mm-hmm. I think in this situation, just because he's been around for so long, but I said this on the Around the 412 podcast, backup goalies don't normally last that long with a team. From what I can remember, I don't think I've seen a backup goalie last this long with a single team ever. This is some weird thing going on with DeSmith in Pittsburgh. It's perfectly fine. You read those numbers. He's a perfectly fine and capable NHL level goalie. Not going to define starter or backup. Perfectly fine and capable NHL goalie. But that price tag is a little steep. I know Nedeljkovic is only $300,000 cheaper, but it's for just 1 year. I know DeSmith is 1 more year, but after everything we've gotten, this goaltending group just needs something fresh. It does, sure, and you planted your flag into Jarry, so that part's not changing. So you kind of need to freshen it up with a different backup. Making it Nedeljkovic just seems like, at least to me, the smarter move, because it's something new. It is something that this fan base can go, okay, they are trying when it comes to the goalies, because after the New York Islanders series a couple years ago, there were people screaming and shouting for Ron Hextall to move on from Tristan Jarry. Not only did he not move on from Jarry, he doubled down and handed out a contract to Casey DeSmith. Now here we are a couple years later. many people wanted Jari to be gone again. Well, we doubled down and we kept him around with a new president of hockey operations in town doing it this time. And I just don't see DeSmith lasting through this. Or we run the 3 goalie system, but the more I think about it, the less likely I think that is.
See, I'm on the opposite side of you with the 3 goalie system. I said on the same podcast you mentioned, I mean, go check it out. We joined Smitty and Tyler on Around the 412, and the one thing that I said there is I would be surprised if Casey DeSmith is not heavily included in all of these trade talks with the San Jose Sharks for Erik Karlsson. The more time goes on and the more that I look around at the league and the landscape of what we've seen in goaltending, the more I think that might not be the case. I mean, you look at last season, just as an example, the Florida Panthers went to the Stanley Cup final. They used 3 goaltenders, right? Throughout the season, they used Spencer Knight, Sergei Bobrovsky, and Alex Lyon. Now, Spencer Knight left on not auspicious. He left due to circumstances that we hope that he obviously gets the help that he needed, but they needed 3 goaltenders. You look at the Vegas Golden Knights. They needed 3 goaltenders. Not necessarily were they playing a 3 goaltender system, but they ended up needing 3 goaltenders because Logan Thompson was not the guy. Jonathan Quick was brought in to be a little bit more of a buffer. And then Aiden Hill ended up being the guy to get them the Stanley Cup. The only team that truly played a 3 goaltender system last year was the Buffalo Sabres. They had Craig Anderson, they had UPL Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and then they had another one before they brought up Devin Levi. So it is an intriguing thing in the National Hockey League now that if you don't have that true number one, that Andrei Vasilevsky, that Ilya Sorokin, that you end up going and saying, we're going to likely need 3 goaltenders this year at some point in time. Now, here's the thing. If you roll the dice with the 3 goaltenders, DeSmith and Nedeljkovic, all staying on this team going into the season, I don't think they keep all 3 up at the NHL level, but I do think that they try to send one down through waivers. And that might be why you bring in Garrett Sparks, Magnus Hellberg, because if one gets claimed on waivers, you have that other NHL type goaltender that's a little bit better. I would say Hellberg is a better option than you've seen in the past with a Dustin Tokarski, with a Louis Domingue, with a Maxime Lagacé. I think Hellberg is a step above those guys, which is why he was brought in to be that number 4 and that in case of waiver claim between DeSmith and Nedeljkovic.
Break class in case of waiver claim.
Yes.
Don't forget the Carolina Hurricanes running a 3 goalie system too. They're like the first team I always think of when it comes to it because those are 2 legitimate starters in Anderson and Kochetkov, and then a 1B in Antti Raanta. But also, you're right about the waiver claims thing because as we were discussing Jonas Korpisalo, whenever I pulled up the Ottawa Senators cap-friendly page, he's their only NHL level goalie under contract. They're going to need one. And if one hits waivers, boom, there's your backup. I would assume because of the recency of the signings of Nedeljkovic, we could throw Hellberg into this list. Those 2 are not going to hit waivers. I mean, Hellberg probably won't, period. But those 2 aren't going anywhere. If anyone's hitting it, it's thanks to the older contract because I always feel weird about signing a guy and immediately losing him. Mm-hmm. I would assume that it is DeSmith that gets placed on waivers. Sure, the contract is a little more beefy, but the Senators have the space and they need a backup goalie, even if it is just for a single season. Plus, running a 1-2 punch of Korpisalo trying to prove his worth as an NHL starter to DeSmith as a backup. That's not a bad situation for the Ottawa Senators. And also, when it comes to the San Jose Sharks and Casey DeSmith maybe being part of a deal there, the Sharks are set on goalies if they're sticking with Kaapo Kähkönen and Mackenzie Blackwood there for as their second goalie. So who knows if they even need a goalie to be involved in any sort of way. I don't recognize these names in their system. I believe one of them is supposed to be really good though. So the goaltending situation is weird. I also don't know what other teams have floating around and what they might need if DeSmith was to hit waivers. I don't see him making it through. So we might just be down to only having 2 goalies anyway.
Well, here's the thing. The waiver period doesn't go into effect until 12 days before the start of the regular season. So there is a chance that the Pittsburgh Penguins could say, okay, we know who's won this battle, whether
Mhm.
it be DeSmith or whether it be Nedeljkovic, with about 2 weeks before the season, say, okay, the waivers go into effect 12 days before. We're going to send this guy down now. And then you're going to have to deal with it during the season if something happens and you have to bring him up. But you don't necessarily have to force somebody through waivers before the start of the regular season if you make that decision with more than 12 days before the season begins. But when it comes to the two of them and who I give the advantage to entering camp, I would say it's Casey DeSmith. Simply because, while yes, DeSmith showed that he can't fill in an injury situation for a long period of time last season, he has still performed better over the past 2 seasons than Alex Nedeljkovic, and he's been here. Which let's not discount that fact when it comes to who Mike Sullivan would want as his backup on opening night. His numbers altogether aren't bad, especially when he's a backup, like we mentioned. So I think that going into camp, I would give the advantage to Casey DeSmith, but I do think it's a true competition in that if Nedeljkovic outperforms him, I don't think that he could just rest on, hey, listen, I've been here longer. They're probably going to stick with me. I still think Casey DeSmith needs to outperform Nedeljkovic, but I do think it's DeSmith's job to lose.
That's fair enough too. That is a fair enough stamp to take on it as well. Uh, Hockey Reference has finally updated. We now have the 23-24 pages set, and all 4 goalies are currently listed on the roster. And of course, this is just Hockey Reference speaking. This doesn't mean they're actually on the roster, but it is 32-year-olds DeSmith and Hellberg and 28-year-olds Jarry and Nedeljkovic fighting it out over likely just 2 spots. Because the 3 goalie system has been a successful one for many a team. I don't know why, just the more I think about it, I don't see us doing it because we're going to put a ton of faith into Jarry probably. Also, ToSmith is still on this roster as well. There you go.
Yeah, it's intriguing because at some point this season the Penguins are probably going to need to use the third goaltender, right?
Yep, that's
a
usual.
lot of teams have had to do that over the past couple of years. It's not just the Penguins that are dealing with goaltender injuries. I mean, we mentioned last year, we talked about the Vegas Golden Knights. We completely forgot the fact that Robin Leonard didn't play at all last season.
And Laurent Brossoit had his hand on the thing too.
Exactly. So, you need more than 2 goaltenders at this point in the NHL, and the Pittsburgh Penguins are stocked up and ready in case something does end up happening. Knock on wood. Tristan Jarry said he's 100% entering the season. You hope that ends up being the case. But the other thing about the 3 goaltender system you mentioned there, I mean, ToSmith, are you going to bury him in the minors again? Are you going to bury Mark Friedman in the minors again? Do you want to play with just one extra defenseman as a healthy scratch? Do you want to play with just one extra forward as a healthy scratch, or do you want to take multiple guys in case of injury? That becomes a really interesting question for the Pittsburgh Penguins and what they end up doing and how they end up constructing the roster out of training camp. But we still have a couple months until then. We still have a lot of stuff to discuss when it comes to the off season. Obviously, not very much news happening, but you know what? We're here anyway. We talk Pittsburgh Penguins hockey twice a week on the Tip of the Iceberg, 3 times a week extra on Penguins to Go. We are going to take a quick break, just as a programming note. We will take a quick break in August between, I believe, the 9th and the 20th. There will be no new episodes of the Tip of the Iceberg or Penguins to Go. We'll be back that following week with, again, 5 episodes a week as we've been doing this entire summer. But that is going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Iceberg podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.